The razor case was empty, but the man who owned it had vanished that very morning. September 20th, 1869. Lord Justice-Clerk George Patton, the second highest judicial officer in all of Scotland, walked out of Glenalmond House. In his morning gown and slippers, he never walked back. I am the keeper of forgotten files, the one who tends to stories that slip through the cracks of history. And tonight, I need to tell you about a morning that changed everything. Because some disappearances, they leave more than just empty spaces. The North British Mail called it a mysterious disappearance. But that word, mysterious, it doesn't capture the wrongness of it. A man of law and order, becoming chaos itself. Picture this. September 18th. Lord Patton returns from his northern circuit, tired but content. His wife beside him. Glenalmond House waiting, their sanctuary in the Scottish hills. 2 days of peace. Then Monday morning arrives. He tells no one where he's going. Just steps outside for what the papers called a short saunter in the grounds. Morning gown flowing, slippers soft against the earth. Notice what the newspaper doesn't say about the razor case they found later. Empty. Sitting on the banks of the River Almond like a question mark carved in metal. If you've ever left the house feeling like you wouldn't return, like something was calling you toward the water, stay close. Because this story, it's about the space between leaving and never coming back. And when they found that empty case, it blinked back at them like an eye. But that wasn't the first death at Glenalmond. Less than a month before Lord Patton vanished, his elder brother died suddenly, right there on the Glenalmond hills. Shooting, they said. A simple accident, 2 brothers. Same grounds, same silence afterward. If you've ever felt a place was cursed, you understand what the locals whispered, how they crossed themselves when they passed the estate gates. The timeline tells its own story. August 1869, the elder brother falls on the hills. September 18th, Lord Patton returns home, seeking comfort. September 20th, he walks out in slippers and joins his brother in the earth. You might think coincidence explains it. 2 tragic accidents, nothing more. But it only deepens the mystery. Because here's what the papers didn't mention. Lord Patton had been struggling, his health failing, his mind heavy with something the Victorian papers called melancholy. She doesn't answer right away when they ask about his state of mind. His wife. That silence, it changes everything. The Procurator Fiscal would arrive the next day. Official inquiries, proper procedures. But by then, the River Almond had already started whispering its secrets to the deep pools below. It's like when the phone rings at 3 a.m. and no one's there. You know something's wrong before you even answer. The necktie came first, found on the riverbank. Some said blood-stained, then the empty razor case, sitting beside it like a confession. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. Stay with me, and I'll show you what the river was really hiding. Because the spout of Buchanty, that's where the truth gets dark. The spout of Buchanty. Even the name sounds like a wound in the earth. It's a gorge on the River Almond, deep, narrow, carved by centuries of water that never stops falling. The kind of place where sound gets swallowed and never comes back. That's where they found him. 200 people had scoured the moors, dragged the river, searched every pool, every bend, every shadow where a man in slippers might have wandered. But the spout had been waiting. You remember the silence from the morning he left, how it settled over Glenalmond House like a held breath. Well, that silence, it followed him to the gorge. The water there runs black in the deeper places. Scottish folklore says rivers like this, they don't just carry water, they carry memory. And some memories, they're too heavy to let go. She lights the candle in the window every night now, his wife, but never looks toward the gorge. That's what changed, I think. The not looking. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in the quietest moments? That prickle at the back of your neck when you're completely alone? The spout of Bucanty feels like that. Always. When they pulled him from the water, it was said the razor was still with him. The one from the empty case. Still sharp, still ready. The official verdict would come later. Suicide by cutting, then drowning. Clean. Simple. Victorian propriety wrapped around a messy truth. But here's the thing about deep water. It changes what it touches. Would you have looked into those pools, knowing what they held? Because the river had been waiting, patient as stone, hungry as time. And when Lord Patton finally came to it, in his morning gown and slippers, it welcomed him home. Procurator Fiscal Jamieson closed the file with both hands. That's when I knew the truth would stay buried. September 22nd, the same day Lord Patton should have been presiding at Jedburgh Circuit Court. Instead, another judge took his place. The machinery of justice, grinding forward without him. But Jamieson had seen something during his investigation, something that made him return to Perth that very afternoon, faster than protocol required. What do you do when the evidence points in directions you can't write in an official report? The razor wounds were precise, professional almost, the kind a man trained in law might make if he knew exactly what he was doing. But witnesses wondered how a man in slippers could navigate that rocky terrain. No man cuts himself and then climbs down rocky walls. No man in nightclothes manages that descent, not willingly. Outside, the almond kept flowing. Steady, steady, like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. His wife knew. You could see it in how she held herself during the questioning. Straight-backed, proper, but her hands wouldn't stay still. Victorian wives didn't speak of their husbands' demons. Not aloud. Not to officials. Maybe you've done the same. Accepted the official story because the alternative was too dark to consider. The melancholy, they called it. A gentleman's affliction. But what if it wasn't affliction at all? What if it was? Invitation. Because here's what Jamieson couldn't put in his report. The water at Spout of Bucanty was unusually calm that morning. No current, no movement, as if something had been waiting. The locals still won't fish those pools. Not since the judge went in. They say the water tastes different now. Metallic, like old pennies or fresh blood. And sometimes, on quiet September mornings, they hear it. The sound of slippers, soft against wet stone. It wasn't the first judge, and it wasn't the last. The River Almond has a memory longer than courthouse records. longer than newspaper archives, longer than the lives of the men who thought they could master it. This is the part I still think about. Not the razor, not the necktie, just how quiet the river got. In Scottish folklore, rivers like the Almond don't just flow, they collect. Deep pools become repositories, places where the restless gather, where those who carry too much weight finally let go. The old wives' tales speak of kelpies, water horses that drag the living down. But that's just how fear dresses up truth, isn't it? Because the real horror isn't monsters. It's the pull of stillness when everything else feels like chaos. Lord Patton wasn't the only man of law to find his way to Scottish waters. Throughout the 1800s, they came. Judges, advocates, men who spent their lives weighing guilt and innocence, only to find the scales tipping inside their own minds. The Victorians called it the burden of justice, that slow accumulation of other people's sins, other people's pain until you can't tell the difference between their guilt and your own. Picture him that morning, walking in his dressing gown, feeling the September air on his skin, the brother's death still fresh, the courtroom battle still echoing, the weight of every verdict he'd ever delivered, pressing down like stones in his pockets. Maybe you've heard it too, just before sleep, that whisper that says you've carried enough, that the water is patient, that it understands. The River Almond still runs past Glenalmond House, still carves its path through the hills where two brothers fell. And on certain mornings, September mornings when the mist clings low, locals say you can see him, walking the banks in his morning gown and slippers, still looking for that short saunter that never ended. But here's what they don't tell you about rivers that keep souls. They're always recruiting. He used to walk with purpose, but that morning he drifted like smoke, like memory, like something already half gone before he even left the house. September 20th, 1869. The last morning anyone saw Lord Justice-Clerk George Patton alive. The first morning the River Almond tasted justice. I keep coming back to the slippers. Not the razor, not the blood-stained necktie, not even the empty case that started this whole story. Just slippers, soft-soled, quiet against the morning dew. The kind of shoes you wear when you don't expect to walk far, when you're just stepping outside for air. But sometimes air isn't enough, is it? Sometimes you need something deeper, something that flows, something that accepts. His wife never spoke of that morning again. Not publicly. But the servants whispered about how she'd stand at the window every dawn for months after, watching, waiting, as if she expected him to come walking back across the grounds, morning gown flowing, slippers soft against the earth, as if death was just another circuit he'd return from. Maybe you've heard it too, just before sleep. That gentle pull toward stillness, that voice that says you've carried enough weight, done enough, judged enough. The River Almond still whispers to those who listen, still offers that same September peace, that same quiet invitation. And every morning, somewhere in Scotland, someone puts on their slippers and steps outside, just for air. The case remains empty, the necktie, blood-stained and forgotten. The gorge at Spout of Bucanty, patient as time. Nothing more. But if you ever find yourself walking toward water in the early morning light, in your slippers, in your night clothes, remember Lord Patton. Remember how quiet it gets, right before the river welcomes you home. The razor case was empty, but now you know where the razor went. I'm the keeper of forgotten files, the one who tends to stories that slip through the cracks of history. And tonight, we've walked together through a morning that changed everything. Lord Justice-Clerk George Patton. September 20th, 1869. A man of law who became something else entirely. The necktie still holds its secrets. The River Almond still flows past Glenalmond House. And somewhere, in the space between leaving and never coming back, he's still taking that short saunter. The file is closing now, the candle burning low. But before you drift towards sleep, before you find that quiet place where thoughts dissolve like morning mist, remember that some stories don't end. They just wait. If you'd like more stories like this, more forgotten files, more morning walks that lead to mysteries, you know where to find me. Here in the quiet hours, here where the forgotten remember themselves. Until then, sleep well, sleep deep, and if you hear the gentle whisper of water in your dreams, if you feel that pull toward stillness, just remember, the river is always patient, always ready, always recruiting. But that empty case, that question mark carved in metal, it's still sitting on the banks of the River Almond, still blinking back at anyone brave enough to look, still waiting for its next occupant. Sweet dreams.